Morning, the most news in the morning, period. Weekdays 6 Eastern.
Supporters of Texas Congressman Ron Paul managed to bring Nevada's Republican convention to a standstill over the weekend, proof that his revolution is still very much alive. We should also point out, too, that he polled 16% in the recent Pennsylvania primary, coming in second. Congressman Paul joins us now to talk about the convention and his book, new book that's just out, The Revolution, a Manifesto. Good morning to you. It's great to see you.
Good morning.
And to all the Ron Paul fans who have been plugging this appearance for the last few days, thanks to them as well. So why is this country in need of a revolution, and a Ron Paul revolution in particular?
Well, you know, there was a statistic out last week. I think 90% of the people were annoyed about what's happening in the economy and the future of this country, and they're very annoyed with what's happening. So we need to change. Everybody is talking about that. The big question is which way are we going? Even the other candidates, the conventional candidates, are out there talking about, I'm going to do this, I'm going to make change, and they talk about, but they're not very specific.
Yeah, you don't seem to have a lot of faith that they are actually agents of change. You say that the parties, what do you call them, Republicrats is what the new party should be called. You say in your book, quote, no wonder the news networks would rather focus on $400 haircuts than matters of substance. There are no matters of substance. Do you really believe that? Because the candidates are out there. They're talking about health care. They're talking about the economy. They're talking about the Iraq war. Those are substantial issues.
Yeah, but it's all pretty much status quo or more of the same. I mean, is anybody talking about free market medicine? No, they're talking about more government. Yet we've had government in medicine for 35 years, and look at the mess we had. Do they talk about changing monetary policy? No, they're going to maintain this Federal Reserve System, which has created the monster. It creates all our bubbles, creates our recessions, creates the inflation. They're not talking about that. Are they talking about tax reform, like getting rid of the income tax? Are they talking about a new foreign policy, which is an old foreign policy, the old Republican foreign policy of non-intervention, where we don't go out and pretending to police the world? Even President Bush ran on, don't police the world, and let's not go into nation building. And that's what we're doing, and we're going bankrupt. So we need to get busy and really have change, because we need to immediately balance the budget, pay down some of the debt, let people go back to work, bring our troops home, have sound money. That's a revolution. But in a way, it's just going back to our original revolution.
Well, at least part of what you just posited there, Bill Clinton was trying to do back in the late 1990s. He wanted to balance the budget, pay down the net.
Yeah, he was lucky because he was on the upswing of the boom cycle when the Fed was pumping in the money through the 90s. There was a lot of capital gains money coming in, but there were no significant cuts in it. What program got cut? Was there less spending or less taxes? There was less deficit, but the national debt continued to go up. We kept borrowing from all the trust funds. We kept borrowing from the Social Security Trust Fund. There was no significant change in policy. And the three other candidates right now in the race, there's not much difference between the three, and it's continuation of the same policy.
Anytime you ever asked whether or not you would launch an independent candidacy for the president, you said, I mean, without fail, I'm a Republican, I'm a member of the Republican Party. As a member of the Republican Party, do you have any interest in campaigning for John McCain?
Probably not unless he changes his tune, like bring the troops home. But, you know, he's the greatest proponent of the war.
How can you be a good Republican if you don't campaign for the Republican candidate, particularly when you've still got an amazing well of support out there?
Well, maybe you're a good Republican if you stand up for Republican principles. I would argue that leadership in the last 10 years have drifted from Republican principles. Deficit financing, big government, more taxes, more bureaucracy, more regulations, more entitlements, policing the world. But that's not what we stand for. So I would say that our position is very much in tune with being a good Republican.
Let me ask you about a couple of the big issues that are out there affecting Americans right now. The price of oil, food shortage, which is global food prices here in this country, and the debate over biofuels and whether or not food products, sources of food, should be used to try to offset our dependence on foreign oil. What would a Ron Paul revolution do to address those issues?
Turn it over to the market. Politicians and bureaucrats are not smart enough. The most important thing the government can do is to make sure there's no inflation so the prices are held down.
But if you turn it over to the market, wouldn't they just drill every untapped resource for more oil? Where would the incentive be for alternative fuels?
Of price. When prices go up, you have alternatives, and politicians don't know about that. We set the price too often, or assume that we know. We set the price of money, interest rates, which is always wrong. It's either too high or too low. So the market is much smarter than anything the politicians can do. So when the prices go up, we use less, and they look for alternative sources. But instead, the government gets involved, and they say, "Oh, it's corn, so we subsidize corn. We burn up our food, and then the prices of food go up, and we do this with more inflation and more printing of money." So the government just messes the whole thing up, but they have a responsibility. Property rights, protect the environment, have sound money, low taxes, less regulations. If the government does that, then the market will sort it out and decide which is the most efficient energy source.
You mentioned interest rates just a second ago, and hand in hand with that is the value of the dollar, which is partly responsible for why our oil prices are so high.
Right.
Back in the year 2000, you predicted the fall of the dollar, and you take aim at the Federal Reserve in your new book. You say, quote, "Americans must reject the notion that one man, whether Alan Greenspan, Ben Bernanke, or any other chairman of the Federal Reserve Board, can know what the proper money supply and interest rates ought to be. Only the market can determine that." You're all for abolishing the Fed. They're meeting over the next couple of days, tomorrow and Wednesday, to decide what to do about interest rates. What do you think is going to happen, and what do you think the result will be?
Well, they're going to print more money and try to lower interest rates because they're in a mess. But they got in a mess because they had interest rates too low and they printed too much money. So they created this problem by inflating the currency, and the only solution is inflate the currency more. And all I'm arguing there is that you follow the Constitution. There's no authority for a central bank, and only gold and silver is supposed to be legal tender. We knew, the founders knew what runaway inflation was all about, how they destroyed the continental dollar, and now we're destroying the dollar once again. It's a serious, serious problem economically and politically.
There's so many things to talk about with you, and unfortunately so little time, but I just wanted to ask you about one other thing. The Nevada State Convention was suspended over the weekend because your supporters there got a rule change in which slowed things down in terms of how the delegates were counted and apportioned. What was that all about, and what will the net effect be?
I don't know all the details. I was there, gave a speech, and then I had to move on. But yes, we had a lot of supporters there, and the people who were in charge of the party there seemed to want to exclude us, and they closed it down. Somebody said, sometimes factions walked out. This time the party walked out, and they didn't want us to have the delegates.
Are you looking for more delegates?
Oh, sure. I mean, we're picking up delegates all the time, and that's what campaigns are supposed to be for. I mean, what's the sense of having a convention if everything is decided? And it's sort of a shame the taxpayers help pay for these conventions, but it's nothing more than a show. And we're trying to say that we have a right to argue our case that the Republicans ought to stand for something. And they used to, and I'd like to see that happen again.
Well, you still got some money to do it, too. I think you got $4 million left over in your campaign.
Something like that.
Not bad. Other candidates would like that money. Congressman Paul, it's always great to see you.
Thank you.
Thanks for dropping by this morning. Congratulations on the book. It's a great read. It's a very small book, too. It's easy to carry around. Thanks again.